Welcome to the Mind Sensei Podcast. I'm your host, Peter Taz, and I'll be taking you on a journey to the world of martial arts and introduce listeners to some of the most inspiring and knowledgeable practitioners from around the world. Whether you're a seasoned martial artist or a curious beginner, or just enjoy hearing a great story, the Mind Sensei Podcast Down Under has something for everyone. So tune in, sit back, and let us take you on a journey through the world in martial arts.
So most of the physical stuff I did was with Jeff on The Perfect Weapon and on Street Night. But prior to that, I did different auditions for different things. But I was also just getting into the Stuntmen's Association, which is very difficult, and working with different guys and different things. So I did a lot of things as a non-union guy, and just little things here and there. Mainly what I was doing was choreography, and I did probably, I don't know, so it was a short period of time because most of that was done in '86. And then the first year I was working for Mr. Parker, we did a number of things. We did a thing with the, what were they called? Not the Ninja Turtles, Power Rangers. We did the Power Rangers were very popular back then. We were in a couple scenes with the Power Rangers, me and about 6 of my students. And we did some sort of Ninja Turtles thing, but not for the film, for some other sort of project, but little things like that here and there. My main thing at that time was, with Ed Parker. And of course, Jeff was constantly going on auditions. And anytime he had to, when he had to do certain things, like do a fight scene, he would show me, I think I'm going to do this. And they didn't want you to, a lot of times they didn't want you to bring people with you. So he would go and do things, have to do something in the air or try to do this. It wasn't, it didn't sell as well, but he could show them what he was talking about. So a lot of stuff I did was that sort of stuff, or letting the star of some film, do a hip throw on me, that sort of thing. And then I'd get up and did some stuff at the Comedy Store and the Improv Store, because I had some students who were comedy writers on Saturday Night Live, and also who emceed at the Comedy Store. So we'd come do an impromptu fight session. They'd call me out of the crowd, like pretend I said something, heckled them, and, I'd answer back, yeah, what are you going to do about it? They invite me up on stage, and of course, I'm a much bigger guy. I usually wear boots, so now I'm much taller even. And the 2 guys that we do this with are small guys. So he'd do a technique on me, and it would sell really well. So it was fun. So a lot of stuff like that. Probably the funnest. And we did a lot of stuff because, remember, you had the Perfect Weapon, but you had the trailer to the Perfect Weapon. You had the promos for the Perfect Weapon. We had to add some scenes, and for all those, it's a day or two of fight scenes in production. And then, of course, they have to whittle it down to see what they're going to put in the actual film, or what's going to go in the trailer and that kind of stuff. And some of our best stuff, I always felt, ended up on the cutting room floor. A lot of really good stuff. And then Jeff and I both felt they had the wrong people doing that first edit of the Perfect Weapon. And but nevertheless, when Jeff's career, wasn't really taking off like he wanted to, and we had hoped. And then when I started working for Ed Parker, on the first lesson, I was going to go out to his actual home and do my first lesson. Well, let me back up. When Mr. Parker said, I want you to run the dojo. So I accepted. And then I was going to go back, I don't know, a few days later and talk some more about the details. And one of the things I said was, well, I think that, I said, there's a guy in there named Muhammad and another guy named Masood. And I said, I really think, and see, right now, Mr. Parker, I only teach a group of my own guys. There was about 18 of them at the time, something like that. They were all either just under black belt. I think a couple had already got their black belt, something like that. A couple of them had been there longer than me. but they were, a little bit behind in rank. And I said, those guys, Mohammed and Masood, have been teaching a lot of kids classes. I don't teach any kids classes. So I think we had to bring Mohammed on with me. Mr. Parker was adamant. It's the first argument we had. It's the first thing we disagreed about. He says, Bryan, trust me. All we need is you. Diane Tanaka, Barbara, Frank Trejo, others have told me, once you get in there, everything's going to be good. You don't need I said, well, just like a junior manager, a co-manager or something. So we argued about it. And so I finally won out. He says, you're going to wish you hadn't though, Bryan. You're going to come to me and probably not too long and say, yeah, Mr. Parker, you were right. And I said, maybe. He says, and honestly, I budgeted X amount for you to be manager. I can't budget anymore. So right away I realized, oh, crap. He says, so I'm going to have to take what I was going to pay you and split it in two for both of you. I said, all right, Mr. Parker, let's do that. That's fine. Also, Muhammad had been at the dojo. I think he was a blue belt when I started. And Muhammad was great. And he became a good friend. And he was also young. Like me, we were both young. And he didn't have a lot of obligations. And I thought, this would be a good thing for him too. And sure enough, not too much time, in about 6 months or so, I realized, he was probably right. It probably would have worked out better if it was just one manager. It would have worked out better. And then not long after that, though, Muhammad decided to go open up his own dojo up the road. And that was great. And then it all worked out the way it should have worked out. So that was all good at that time. But yeah, that was what when we were trying to get Jeff's career off the ground, Mr. Parker said, all right, come out for get back to my lessons. Come out for your first tactical lesson. I think Barbara was going to be there. He says, bring Mohammed since you want him to be co-manager. Bring Mohammed. I says, all right. I said, do you mind if I bring another guy? He says, who's that? I said, Jeff Speakman. He goes, who's Jeff? Who's Jeff Speakman? I said, remember the guy after the last test we had and we stood out in the front foyer of the dojo and you and Howard Silva and this guy named Jeff were going back and forth with jokes and there's about 20 of us there? He goes, oh, yeah. He says, yeah, he's got great jokes. And he says, why do you want to bring him? I says, well, he helps out a lot at the dojo. And he says, he's really going to help out a lot now. Plus he worked with me at the limousine company. I hired him and he's trustworthy. He's a great instructor. Yeah, it'd be great if he can come too. And he says, yeah, okay. So that's how Jeff got out to Parker's house the first time. But Mr. Parker, at some point, made a call or Jeff probably has a more accurate, exactly what happened first, second, and third. But basically, Ed Parker started opening doors for Jeff and got him into the proper agent. And that agent at a large firm, that agent contacted Paramount Pictures because when Ed Parker walked in that agency, talent agency, walked right into the head guy's office in Ed Parker fashion. Every secretary is trying to stop him. It's like, oh, let me buzz you in. It's like Ed Parker's just walking through and gets in and turns out that guy was an old student of Ed Parker. And he said, oh, hey, Ben, how you been? I got this kid named Jeff and he needs a break and he's got a lot of talent and great guy. And he said, this guy said, but he's with you, right? Meaning you're vouching for him. Miss Parker said, absolutely. I would be here. And now I wasn't there, but a guy named George Waite was there in that meeting. He says, Bryan, it was typical Ed Parker. George Waite was the guy who used to connect anything Mr. Parker and Elvis Presley, any events they did together, George Waite would put it together. And George Waite would correspond with all of Elvis's people. And so he was Ed Parker's representative and And that was his own people, and they would get everything together. That's who George Waite was. And so she's walked in and made that. And pretty soon, Jeff was called in by Paramount. Paramount's, much bigger, one of the premier companies, Paramount Pictures. And they wanted Jeff they wanted to come down to the dojo and have Jeff do an audition there. They wanted to see him in action at our dojo. There's probably a film of this somewhere. But so it's happening. So we put together a scene, a choreographed scene that we'd done before. And it ends with a jump spinning sidekick. And it sends me flying, right? After, repeated strikes. And I go after him, he goes after me, but then he just, finishes me off. And that sidekick sends me flying. Well, the old dojo was fairly narrow. And we had bleachers right at the end. So we get amped up and get ready for this thing. And there's like 4 major Paramount executives there. The bigwigs came down. They were going to pour a lot of money into this film and the promoting of this film, the making of this film. And Ed Parker was there and talked a little bit. Jeff talks a little bit. Jeff's always very good in front of people. He really rises the occasion when he has to get in front of a group. He's very good, very focused, tells them basically what we're going to do, and then we do it. And I was selling everything. He was flying. It was beautiful. He kicks me with that jump spinning sidekick, and I fly. And I purposely didn't really stop myself. I literally went through the wall, and the walls are like here, and the wall to the next store, the next building was here, the next business. I broke through this wall, and my lower back went through that wall. I went, pop out, right through. Half my body is through the wall. And I remember these guys in those bleachers, there's 4 executives, they brought like 10 people with them. They stood up and cheered. And we had about 30 of our people over on this side, on the mat, because they were in the class leading up to this demonstration. They were in the class. We were all doing the class. And so they were getting an eye full of everything. And then you see Jeff do his thing. And that was probably the best sales job. It couldn't have worked out any better. And I'm a lot bigger than Jeff. So when I flew. And they cheered. He got a contract, a 3-picture contract. And that started all that. So Ed Parker was very influential at the beginning of Jeff's career. And I think, and Jeff would be first to admit, as anyone would, the trajectory of things, all of our lives, but certainly Jeff's, would have been way different if Ed Parker would have stayed. He left the planet not long after that filming of all the Perfect Weapon and all that. I think Slot changed that, But that was a great time, a really great time to be part of that dojo. A lot of action. When there's a buzz about something, a lot of old students start coming back. A lot of people who used to train with Ed Parker started coming back. I remember a couple of TV things. I got a couple little jobs. I got to do more choreography, and I was in the scene. It was a pilot series for something, and that was put together by a guy who came back hearing that there was that one of Mr. Parker's guys was they're making a film with them, Jeff. He came back and said, "Oh, is this happening? Is this happening?" I said, "Absolutely." He says, "Well, I've got a production coming up, and we need a choreographer." And I says, "Well, Jeff and Ed Parker are a little busy." "No, we mean you." And okay, I've done that before. I'll do that. So a lot of other things came in. It was great. It was really a powerful time at the dojo. A lot of action,
It's still probably one of the all-time greatest martial art movies out there, like up there with Enter the Dragon and all the rest of them. I think it's very well done.
I think absolutely. And I think, I know Jeff was not happy with the final cut. Either was I. They also cut out not just a lot of good martial arts scenes. They cut out the co-star, Mariska Hargitay. Now, Mariska Hargitay later on got into that series, what is it, CSI or LA Law or something. It's still on. What's she on? I've never seen it. It's like
CSI.
CSI?
Yeah.
And she was great. Wonderful girl. So I trained her for all her fight scenes, and none of them ended up in the film. But I've heard there's a version of Perfect Weapon out there that's edited with a lot of that stuff back in it. And they say, those who have seen both versions say, "Oh, the second version is way better." she's in it, his love interest. She does the karate, and I've got like 20 students in that film. I'm in that film quite a bit, fight scenes and things, and it was just it was a great time. Um, yeah, when you look at all the different, I thought Steven Seagal's first film was good. That was another good martial arts film. Yeah, Perfect Weapon's right there with that one. And again, it was a good production. Paramount did a good job. They needed a different director. They changed directors midstream, and it kind of shows. They had to change directors, and we felt that really hurt the continuity of the film. But nevertheless, it was great. Really, really great time for all of us, I think.
So was Seth Sakai, I think I'm saying it right, was Master Lowe. Did you ever meet him at all?
He was in Perfect Weapon?
Yeah, the instructor that owned the dojo.
Oh,
Master Lowe.
a little bit. A little bit. The it was it was a small role. I remember Ed Parker actually read for that role, and again, they just wanted someone more Asian. And Ed Parker, throughout Ed Parker's career in the movies, in that, because he had a lot of he has a lot of movie and TV experience. Anytime martial arts, even though he's the one who introduced it to TV and movies, basically, they always wanted someone who looked more Asian. And he doesn't have that Asian look, because to most people back then, and even now, if you don't look Asian, they just go, "Oh, how can he know karate? He's not even Oriental." It's weird. It's still to this day, it's like that. But so he did. If Mr. Parker didn't get that role, they did have the guy who was in Steve McQueen's film, Mako. Mako was in it. What was he? Jeff's mentor. I haven't seen the film since it came out. I think he was Jeff's mentor, his early mentor or something. It was cool having him around. He was a famous guy.
What about Tanaka?
Oh, he was hilarious. Now, he knew Ed Parker from, they went to college together. Tanaka told me that he and Ed Parker used to terrorize all the football players. I guess at some point, some football player made the mistake of either challenging Ed Parker or something like that, and Ed Parker thumped him. And then so all the football players were scared of Ed Parker, but Tanaka was there at the same time. And Tanaka's, larger. And he says, we'd walk around together. Everyone would just move away, just move away, just move away. He's one of the nicest guys in the world. And I remember him at Ed Parker's funeral. He was so torn up. He just saw Ed Parker as an older brother, although I think they were about the same age. Ed Parker had he had that quality to a lot of guys that were older than him. They all saw him like as an uncle, or Terry Robinson, who was one of Jack LaLanne's early friends and partners in the fitness world. He talked about Ed Parker like that. It was crazy. I think he was 15 years older than Ed Parker. Joe Himes, remember the name Joe Himes? Joe Himes was way older than Ed Parker. He talked about Ed Parker like that. Like he said, Bryan, the wisdom Ed Parker had. He met Ed Parker when Mr. Parker was like 30 or something. He says the wisdom he had for a very young man was outstanding. He says if there's actually a thing as an old soul, Ed Parker was an old soul. He just had that quality. It seemed to know a lot about a lot, and had that calming effect on folks. I think it's one of the reasons he was so successful. He just had that. When he walked into a room, you realize, yeah, everything's going to be okay. Ed Parker's here, in every way. He'll take care of that. Whenever I had a problem, personal, business, whatever, Sparker, what do you think about this? And he'd tell me what he thought. I always felt better. Yeah, that sounds right. I'll do that. It just, but again, he's 30 years older than me. He's supposed to sound like that. The guys older than him still looked at him that way. I always thought that was fascinating,
And now your guys come to you with their problems, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I tell them, I got 5 kids. I got enough people coming to me with their problems.
Sound like the guy for the one where he's on Mars, Total Recall. Man, I got 5 kids. That's your line now, right?
That's right. Unbelievable.
Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit. I know the story, but a lot of our listeners would not know the story about how Conquering Shield came to be. And it's called what, the $10,000 or the $1 million technique.
I was saying a lot of guys, like when I came to Ed Parker, before I knew him personally, I heard a lot of stories about Ed Parker. And then you wonder how many, stories get exaggerated over time. So I wonder how many of them are true and all that kind of stuff. And then I got with him, and one of the first things he said to me, so we had a Tuesday lesson where it was just Ed Parker and myself at his house. Then we had a Thursday lesson where it was me, Barbara, Jeff, sometimes a guy named Pat Salantri, and sometimes someone else was in there who was from out of town visiting. Maybe sometimes Frank Trail would stop in because he'd like to sit in and hear what we have to say, and Howard Silva and these kind of guys. But he sat me down on the couch that first day where it's just he and I. He says, Bryan, there's a lot I want you to know. And I'm thinking he's talking about the system. He goes, no. He says, I know, I've seen you move. I've seen you talk about Kenpo and tests. You definitely are well-versed, and, we're going to go more. He says, but you need to know about the martial arts community. The West LA dojo, he says, used to be the Pasadena dojo where people would come looking for me to meet me or to see what everything's about or to challenge me in the old days. He said, but now it's West LA more. So people will be coming there. Maybe I'm going to meet them at 5:00 and they might come there 2:00 early. I want you to know who they are. Or if I'm not coming at all and they're just coming around because it's internationals time and they're coming in to say hello to West LA dojo because the internationals are that weekend. He says, there'll be a lot of guys over time coming in. He says, I want you to know who's who in the zoo. So ask me questions about anybody and really anything. Fire away. We'd also go through techniques. Mainly, though, techniques I had questions on. So there's a lot of stories behind a lot of his techniques, how they came into the system. Not every technique, but many of them. And the Conquering Shield one, it's one that it's one of my favorites. And I think he liked the way I did it. And then he corrected something on it. And as he was correcting it, we sat back down on the couch. He told me the story of that technique. He says, Bryan, grab me. So I grabbed him. I've got a longer arm than him, I'm taller and longer. And he said, now hold me at bay, meaning hold me straight arm out and turn your shoulders like I can't reach you. He couldn't, right? I said, all right. I felt I never wanted to grab at Parker. And, he's got his Hawaiian shirt on and we're in his living room. And he says, so this is the way it was. He says, the guy that I did this on, and I'm thinking, oh, this is a story. This is going to be a story. And he says, he's about 6 inches taller than you. He says, he's a big guy. He's a stunt guy. He says, I'm on the set of something. It was one of Blake Edwards' films. And the previous day, they had done a fight scene. And Mr. Parker was showing some of the stunt guys how to do certain moves. And Mr. Parker, unlike a lot of other Kenpo black belts, never hurt people he was working on unless they just needed to be hurt. And that was very rare. So, and that's fine. So he wouldn't intentionally hurt a stunt man. Plus, it's a Blake Edwards production. They're best friends. He's not going to hurt somebody. Anyway, he comes on set the next day. And he's they're setting things up. And some big old guy said, Bryan's guy's huge. Comes up, says, I got a bone to pick with you. And Parker says, yeah. He says, right then, he knew this guy was getting ready to either hit him or grab him. He knew it. So he says, he's thinking to himself, I'm probably going to have to hit this guy first. He says, you hurt so-and-so. Ms. Parker says something like, what of it? Because this guy was already intent on doing something, so why even deny it? Like, yeah, and he says, I didn't hurt the guy, but I didn't care. This guy was going to be, a hero now. And he says he reached out to grab me with his arm straight. And in a blink of an eye, I realized I can't reach his face with my fist. I don't think I can reach his ribs. He says, so I pinned his hand, and he says, my first thought, I'm going to break his kneecap. He says, but as soon as I went to pin him to control his arms, says, and right then I realized, oh, I'll just break it. And he turned his arm on an angle and thrust up as he, sure enough, broke his knee. So he broke his knee, broke his leg. He didn't know he was breaking things at the time, but he cracked through the knee and the elbow. So he broke the guy's elbow going up. And if you know concrete steel, you know that's the first move. And I had never done it like that. I didn't do it with a rising diagonal upward lifting forearm. But he did. That's the way he did it. And he says, then I landed and boom, his arm's right there. My elbow hit it, jerked his face in. I hit up and he collapsed. He said, all the stunt guys come around and they're working on it. They keep looking back at Ed Parker like, what in the who could do this to a guy? This is like their enforcer. He's the guy who intimidates everybody. I don't even think he was a stuntman. I think he just came in as the union enforcer. So he says, yeah, so I get a lawsuit. All right. And I go to court. I'm sitting there with my attorney. And my attorney says, oh, here they come. And Ed Parker's saying, this guy. Because he had heard in the complaint, neck issues, wired jaw, broken leg, broken arm, broken nose, heart, vision troubles, can't swallow. I mean, my name and all kinds of stuff. Mr. Parker said, you sit in his chair, looking straight ahead. He hears that and says, this guy, I feel like hitting him again. Turns around and looks. He says, Bryan, he's on crutches. He's got two people helping him. He's got a neck brace. His jaw is actually wired. Old time. This is old school wired. Doesn't look like he looks today. He says wired is everything's black right here because he smashed his nose. The last heel palm claw is a heel palm claw. Heel palm to the nose, claw to the face. So this is all black. He's got scrapes down his face with this Parker's nails. Nose was broke. And a few other things. That's right. Arm and a cast all the way up to the shoulder. He's on one crutch. I mean, he says, Bryan, he says, I looked at it and went, oh, I've just lost this case. And then he says, my second thought was, I probably should. He says, I looked at it. I felt bad. He says, I felt bad. He says, how did that do that much damage? But it was real. They had a doctor come up and testify. Broken fibula, broken disc, broken. He said, this guy was a wreck. So he lost. He said, the lawyer looks at him, he goes, Ed, we're going to lose this. He goes, yeah, I know. Just how much? And they settled on $10,000, which at that time, in today's dollars, it's not crazy. It's probably like 30 grand. I don't know, 40 grand maybe. But he said, I paid it. And that was what he says, but it's a great technique and there's proof that it works.
So it's a bit of return on investment, 30 grand to create a new technique for the system, right?
No kidding. That goes on for decades and decades. It turned out to be one of my first affairs. It's also showing the 3 points of contact and, double strikes simultaneous and just all kinds of range issues and target issues. And that you can take that. I've taken that one technique and taught for 2 hours on it at seminars on that one technique and everything it involves. It's fantastic.
I think when I teach that technique, I use that as a point to reference. This is a bit like computers. We're now multitasking, right?
Exactly. Great.
So I don't think he was an enforcer after that, right? He retired.
I don't think he would ever grab somebody again. He was a little gun shy after that.
He's heading down to Boost Juice buying juices all the time.
He's lived in a straw for a while.
It should be paper or plastic.
Yes, exactly.
Nice. Okay. Nice. Let's talk a little bit about United Kenpo Systems and how that came to be and your journey there with that.
Well, when Mr. Parker abruptly died in December 1990, he actually had just done a seminar at the Westlake Dojo that I was managing. And he did something that day that he hadn't done. He didn't do always. He did it sometimes and yada, yada. And we had a really good crowd there that day watching. He had a lot of old students. He had students there. We had students there that had their kids in class now training with me. And the parents, Jack Autry was there with his kids. And Mr. Parker signed a lot of belts. he did do a lot of belt signing and all these things, but he did a lot of belt signing that day. Anyway, there was a big Kenpo party that I used to organize, a Kenpo Christmas party. And we were doing it that night at one of my students who lived up in the rich folks area. And I got waylaid with a friend who he had gotten in a car accident. Something had gone on that waylaid me about an hour and a half. I had to go take care of something. There was no getting around it. I had to do it. And I remember telling, no phones back then, portable phones. So I told, I don't know who I told, Jeff or somebody. I says, tell Mr. Parker, just, try to wait till I get there. I'm going to be late because I got to go take care of this thing. Right. And then a couple different people said, Bryan, I got there finally and to the party that I put together. And they said, Ed Parker had to go. I said, oh, man. They said he was pacing around saying, where's Bryan? Where? I got to get to the airport, but I want to talk to Bryan first. Kept saying those words. I want to talk to Bryan first. And might have been Big Jimmy was talking to as well, but a couple different people told me exactly the same thing. So I don't know what he wanted to say or if he had some sort of weird premonition, but it was very strange. And I didn't get to talk to him. And then that night at the airport, that's when he died, when he arrived in Hawaii. So it was at Christmas time. So we usually close the dojo for 2 weeks anyway. So in that 2 weeks, the whole Kenpo world, including the West LA Kenpo people and others, we were scrambling to see, how we wanted to do this. And of course, I would have to deal with now Mrs. Parker. And I was hoping, and we got along great. At that time, her and I got along great. She'd bring in sandwiches to me and Mr. Parker when we'd be doing our Tuesday lessons and everything. She was wonderful. He'd always have a little, sly joke for her or a wink or a nod. It was very cute. They were a cute little, late 50s couple where I thought they were a very old couple at the time. Yeah, late 50s, right? They were great. So we'd have been great. But I thought, I hope she grabs some of the upper echelon people. She should grab in a George Waite, who literally saved Ed Parker's empire, financially saved his empire twice in Miss Parker's life. That's a different story I can share with you later if you'd like. Or, the Jack Autreys of the world. Some of these guys, maybe some of the guys who ran dojos, Joe Palonzo, who at that time had dojos back east for a very long time. Guys that had, been around for a long time. Not so much me. I was 29 years old and hadn't been around near as long as those guys, didn't have the experience. So I was hoping she'd put together a little board of those kind of guys. I certainly would give my input if she wanted it, but she didn't really do any of that. And she ended up just kind of wanting to do things her own way. And the way she wanted to do things had nothing to do with the way Ed Parker and I were doing them, honestly. Tried as we might, her and I tried to get along in the business world. And frankly, I couldn't stand by very long and keep doing things the way she wanted to do it when I knew it just wasn't the way it was to be done. And I knew she'd been around a long time with Ed Parker, and her and he, opened their first dojos and everything. I know it was a good wife. She was helping her husband like my wife did with me. We opened up all of our dojos. I knew that. But she just wasn't using the right approach. She wasn't using the right people. I realized at a certain point, and me and George Way were very good friends. And George said to me finally, he says, Bryan, I think this is the time just to go open your own dojo. He says, Leilani, for some reason, seems to be pushing away all the people that were closest to Mr. Parker, all the men in his life that she felt took him away from her. And that made sense to me because I went down the list of who she basically was trying to cut out of the system, cut out of the Kenpo IKK. And they were the guys who were the cornerstones of his organization. And it made sense. And George had been around a long time, decades with Ed Parker, even at that point. He helped put together the first internationals, frankly. So he says that it made sense. He says, Bryan, everything I've done for her and Mr. Parker and the family and lots of things. She's even not very receptive to me. So I think this might be the time. I says, okay. So I started making plans and opening my own dojo. Well, Jeff, he obviously didn't want to, he'd be associated with Mrs. Parker as far as promoting the perfect weapon, if that could help her and, you know, the dojo that she was, she kept the Westlake dojo and the Pasadena dojo. So he wanted to do what he could to help her, but he didn't want to be in an organization that her and other people she had picked were heading up, because it wasn't the direction that we all saw. It was not. There's one person on this planet who knew the direction that Parker was heading. It was me, because that's what this was all about. Out with Larry and a lot of that nonsense in late '87, and then forward, clean up the IKK, clean up the system first, clean up all the techniques that sets the katas, decide exactly what was going to be for what rank, what was all the requirements, make sure they were written in the ideal phase, and that would be the final phase of the ideal, things like that. Then go out to all the schools that carried his crest and make them member schools again, not franchises, make them member schools again, like they once were 20 years earlier. So that was kind of the whole deal. And I knew how he wanted to get there. We discussed it at length. It was going to be a great adventure. She wasn't heading in that way. In fact, she was, in my opinion, heading just the opposite. I didn't know why. I still don't know why. It didn't matter. I wanted to go. So Jeff said, yeah, let's you and me go do something together. I said, yeah, that's probably the best thing to do. And so we started United Kenpo Systems, UKS. And that was Jeff and I started that up together. And that's what we did. That's where it all started.
The journey lead to now for United Kenpo Systems. So where is it now?
Not much difference. One of the things Jeff wanted to do was to grow a system into a large membership system organization. And I did. That's not where me and Jeff had our main differences and disagreements. We started disagreeing on a lot of things, but he was still trying to get his career continuing from the perfect weapon with Street Night and then some others. So he was really doing more of that, and I was doing more of bringing, whoever wants to come into our organization, come on in, and here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. And, as you know, there's a lot of paperwork, a lot of business that needs to be done to get all that going, to do it right, do it correctly. But the basic philosophy has to be the same. Your goal and your vehicle to get there has to be pretty close to the same, or you're going to have too many problems. So when Jeff and I eventually went our separate ways in '95, a large contingent went with Jeff and a smaller contingent went with me. One of the things that I had said, I knew that a lot would go with him because, it's a lot of guys outside of Los Angeles. Jeff was the movie star. He was the Kenpo movie star. Yeah, I was the guy who was, Ed Parker's student and ran his flagship and all that. But they really just wanted, it's always been like this in anything. They wanted to be near someone who, was famous. So they went with him. And I made a thing in our system. I said, look, all you guys that are with me and not with Jeff, honestly, and I said it in a very nice way. I said, from this point forward, anybody else joining, no one's really going to join. I want this to be organic. Any school that starts with our United Kenpo Systems, because I kept United Kenpo Systems, because everything was in my name. Jeff started his own, I can't remember what he calls his federation, but he's changed the logo a little bit and called it something different. But the guys that stayed with me, I said, organic. So anybody, they have to come from me or they have to come from one of my black belts. Otherwise, there's just too many problems and I don't have time for it. It's just the way I was then. And that's the way I am now. I don't need all that extra stuff. I saw how running a large organization, all the headaches it caused Ed Parker, may have caused him to have an early heart attack. it just was, I mean, I got to hear about all the problems he was having with the guys in Chile and the guys in this and the guys over there and his senior student over there and his lower ranked student over there. It's like, oh my God. So I wanted to be organic. Jeff wanted his part to be large. So he grew his and I actually reduced mine. Um, and only about 5 years ago, and primarily at the behest of a contingent of my black belts coming to me saying, Mr. Hawkins, there's a lot of schools out there around the world who either left their instructor or their instructor passed away, or for a variety of reasons, they're out there with no real leadership. And they might be 2 or 3 steps down the generation from Ed Parker. Their instructor's instructor knew Ed Parker. So it's already kind of separated. And there's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of people who never even learn the whole system. They don't understand what he left and what he left intact. Well, that's what I teach. That's what we do. They said, we really ought to open our doors to other schools if they, are good people and meet the criteria and that kind of thing. And I agreed. So we started after, putting some of them on, maybe 6 months to a year of probation, just kind of checking them out, getting to know them, letting them join some classes, letting them come on some podcast or some Zooms and come to a camp maybe. So I get to know them. So I know they're good people, they're good men, they're good women. Then they come in. So now we've got some of them. So UKS is still pretty much what it was then. It's bigger. Obviously, it's bigger now because 5 years, 6 years ago, we started opening it up. And so my own students have gone out and started their own schools. And then, of course, they're part of our school, our UKS, which is all fantastic. So it worked out well. I also, the same year Jeff and I parted company in spring of 95, a little early, March of 95, Jeff and I decided to go separate ways. In May of 95, I met a woman who would become my wife. And a couple years later, we were married and started popping out babies. So at that time, too, since Mr. Parker passed, I was traveling around doing a lot of seminars on the East Coast. There's a lot of schools Frank Trejo used to go to and then asked me to start going to them because what they really wanted was to learn the Ed Parker American Kenpo System as left by Ed Parker. Frank, we'd go to a place and hear that and say, I got your guy. I'll ask Mr. Hawkins if he wants to come out. So I was doing a lot of seminars there, a lot of seminars in Texas, a lot of seminars in different places. But I started having kids. And I remember the stress Mr. Parker was under having 5 children. I come from 10 kids, so I knew what having lots of kids means, but you don't really know what it means until they're your own offspring. And how he was traveling every weekend, pretty much every weekend, since his kids were before they were born, and certainly once they were all little kids. So I thought, well, at a certain point, I'm going to stop rather traveling around doing seminars. So when my oldest son, we were doing a seminar in Sacramento, and I think my oldest son was something like 4 years old. And my second oldest was a year younger, and my third oldest was a baby, and my fourth oldest had just been born or something. At that time, I was up at Bob Lyle's in Sacramento. Diane Tanaka and Bob, a bunch of guys were there, and I said, this will be my last seminar until these guys are about 21. Because I thought, I am not going to start traveling all over, missing my kids on the weekends, having them not see dad from Friday to, Sunday night, not being at all their school functions, all the sports activities. I'm blessed enough to have dojos where all my children spent every after school all the way up through like 6th grade, being at the karate schools with their dad and their brothers and sisters. And then when they got into their sports, I made them all still do at least one day of training a week. And they chose fighting class, of course. So they never dropped it, never stopped. And all these still train, they still teach at the Kenpo dojos and other, they still compete in tournaments, a couple of them. So that's kind of where the UKS was and where I was in terms of seminars. So now I'm going out doing seminars again, kind of getting back to that. I'm able to now. My youngest is 16, and he's the only one still living at home. And the other ones are all still in the area, but, we see each other enough so I can travel now. And I've been taking my number 2 son, Johnny, with me on those seminars. I've taken 2 or 3 of my sons on most places I've gone. I'll do all the Kenpo stuff. Then their expertise is not just Kenpo, but in grapplings. They do the grappling portion of it and fighting portion of it. So it's great. It works out. It gives them a nice mix of everything. And so it's good. So we're ramping that up a lot as we speak.
So you started with Shotokan, went into a hybrid Shoshu, and ended up in
Yep.
Kempo. What are your thoughts on cross training, and with the prevalence of ground fighting now, do you incorporate any in your teaching?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I remember there's always been the pie. Mr. Parker said, Kenpo is showing you how to use every part of your body as a weapon, every part of the opponent's body as a target, and in any level of threat. So just a drunk guy in a bar or life and death, and you have to protect your daughter. Any of those elevations, those gradations of threat assessments, Kenpo should satisfy them all. And I remember when he told me that, I have it in my notes. I took notes every time I was with him. And I remember thinking at that time, because I was a grappler coming into martial arts. I was a boxing a bit, but grappling a lot. And I left grappling to come to striking because I knew when fights got more serious, and as a little kid, wrestling was the most important thing a kid should know to, stave off another little bully. But my grandfather, I'll tell you this, my grandfather, when I was a little kid, he says, Bryan, when you're young, because one of my brothers and sisters told him about a fight I just won, and I was like in 4th grade. I strangled some kid in 4th grade and, choked him out because he was trying to flirt with my girlfriend, 4th grade. And I remember that, and I remember my grandpa came to visit, and I told him about it, and I was all proud. I said, I could whip anybody in my class. I just choked out Fred Wilson. Looking at me, and he says, how are your grades? I said, Grandpa, my grades aren't so good. He goes, well, that's more important than fighting. He says, I'll tell you something else about fighting, Bryan, because he was always known as a great fighter, my grandpa. A lot of stories there too. But he says, when you're a kid your age, fighting's just fighting. He says, when you get older, Bryan, 19, 20, 21, fighting gets real serious. Fighting can leave people maimed or dead. He says, where I come from, a lot of in old town Nebraska, O'Neill, he says, fighting, a lot of guys end up just dead, or they can't walk right the rest of their life, or they can't speak right. They lose their sight in one eye and lose their, he says it gets very serious. And so having that background in my mind and Mr. Parker telling me we need to be able to use our body as a weapon in any situation. Well, I already knew that. I knew I was a bouncer at a bar when I was 20. So I was younger. I was checking IDs of guys that were older than me. I was 20. I was supposed to be 21 to even be in the bar, but I was bouncing at 20 because I knew the owner of the bar. And I remember in a lot of situations there, you can't just hit him. In my mind, I was thinking, Kenpo should be an on-off switch. You either don't do anything, like you walk away from the situation and be the, proud martial artist, or you go full bore and you leave him not moving. Well, that's not really true. And when I was bouncing, I became really aware of that because the owner of the bar said very distinctly, don't be he started a bunch of us, all these guys were these huge, I'm this, scrappy 20-year-old. He says, I don't want you guys, knocking people out because they use the F word at you. You need to be able to escort them out of this bar and make sure they don't get back in. And if they start a fight out there, don't leave the premises because then now you're going to be in trouble. You stay here. If they come in, well, then you can do, anyway, all that stuff. Thinking, I need something more than just striking. And I don't want to be just wrestling these guys around in these beer, on the floor. It's just beer and sawdust and whatever else is on the floor of a pub, a bar. And I don't,
And in a peanut shells, right?
yeah, let's just say that. It's a lot of vomit and other liquids. So I told myself at the time, I need to be more skilled. I need to have a dimmer switch. I think all of us need to have a dimmer switch. So I made up a series of seminars using the dimmer switch analogy because that threat level isn't serious at a bar. You just need to know I needed to be skilled enough to wrap somebody up and walk him out the door. He doesn't get hurt. I don't get hurt. He goes home or he goes and throws up and then he's fine. Thinks about it and knows he's an idiot. I don't need to break his nose or, I don't need to do any of that stuff. And I knew at that point in my life, I didn't have that skill. I could wrestle him on the ground, but that's not what we're there for either at this particular juncture at that bar. I'm not wrestling some guy. Plus, in that environment, you will absolutely get kicked in the head and stomped on by all of his friends as soon as you go to the ground. So I knew that. So I needed to fill in the slice of that pie that was manipulations and grappling. And grappling also for kids, so they can they can finish aggressive situations with other kids and no one gets hurt. Over here in the States, things are very litigious. Everyone can sue everyone. Now, hopefully that'll change, but it wasn't always like that. But it has been for the last 30 years. So even if that kid attacks my kid and my kid breaks that kid's nose, I'm going to be liable for that kid's nose. So it's kind of backwards, but that is what it is. But if I teach kids just to wrap up the bully on the ground, now chokers wrap up so he can't do anything until the teacher comes, no harm, no foul, and that kid will never bother my kid again. So I started putting together a curriculum. I'll tell you something else that changed my mind. I had got a 14-year-old student, female, and a real good fighter, very wiry, very strong, but slight. She probably weighed, 95, 100 pounds, let's say. She came to me one time. She was kind of distraught. I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "I was at a party over the weekend and my uncle did something to me and I didn't have an answer." She was a brown belt at the time, but a very good brown belt and a great tournament fighter, great fighter in general for her age and her size, really good. I said, "What happened?" "Well, he was playing around with me and says, 'Hey, karate girl, what are you going to do now?' And he grabs her by the shoulders and he throws her on the ground and sits on it and pins her hands to the ground." She says, "Miss Hawkins, my uncle weighs about 280 pounds. He was 6'1", heavy set, about 280 pounds. I couldn't move," she says. "I didn't know what to do." I said, and I felt so bad. I told her, I says, "I'm so sorry to hear that. Lay down on the carpet right there." And she lays down. I sit on her and put her hands there. I told her what to do. She did it. It was like magic. It was like she did it like 10 times in a row. "Mr. Hawkins, that's so great. I wish I would have known that." And I realized, what have I been doing? This was it was at the old dojo, so it was 1992, 1991? Yeah, something like that. Right around there. Anyway, long time ago. Right around that same time, in 1993 was the first UFC. So I know I was working with this girl just before that. And then in around 1992, an old friend of mine, Steve Sears, who's passed away since, but he was a real good collegiate wrestler. And he came and he was a black belt in Kenpo. And he started wrestling with some guys down in a place called Torrance. And he came up one time to visit me. He says, "Hey, come down and wrestle with these guys in Torrance." I says, "What's in Torrance?" He says, "They're called the Gracies. They're these Brazilian guys and they do some Japanese jiu-jitsu." And I said, "Oh," because I knew Japanese jiu-jitsu is weapons, especially the spear, throwing, a little bit of jiu-jitsu, a little bit of judo, and then striking, and then a little bit of ground fighting. Because they believe in 5 stages of range. Very smart, but we're a little ahead of that, but still very smart. I said, "Oh," he says, "Yeah, no, all they do is the ground stuff, and mostly off your back." And I said, "Okay, that sounds cool." But it was Torrance is an hour drive for me, and I'm running a dojo, and got a lot going on. Me and Jeff are doing a lot of stuff, and I says, "All right." So he started coming up and doing everything they were doing, and I said, "Well, that's fun." And so I know, so then when they went to put together, so that was early. When they went to put together the first UFC, Florian Gracie called me and asked if I had some fighters that would want to fight. So that's a whole different story. We had a couple guys that I was thinking of, but I talked both of them out of it. I just didn't think it was the right thing to do in the long run, especially with the first one, the first UFC. But nevertheless, I at that same time that I worked with that female students, that was I think a year or two before the first UFC. I immediately started putting in basic grappling moves into our not into our curriculum. I did it as a non-curriculum stuff. So I started teaching
Just to add on, right?
yeah, they wouldn't be tested on it. In other words, they wouldn't be tested. And I didn't want to officially put it in yet until I got worked out some kinks and saw where I wanted to put what moves at what belt, that kind of thing. So just basic throws, basic wrestling, control manipulation stuff. That was my main thing. Hit a good ground base, and then some submission stuff. So we started putting it in back then, and then as it got more popular, we had already had it in the system, and then I don't know, probably in the late '90s. I think in late '90s is when I finally put it into the curriculum. I can't remember when it was, but so now they have to know certain things, especially the kids. I make it a much bigger part of their curriculum because it's more important for a kid to know that stuff. The adults are more likely to be in much more serious situations, and kids much less likely to be in serious situations. And grappling, remember, I tell all my students, I don't talk to the kids much about it because I don't get to scare them too much. But with adult students, I always tell them, you've come to Kenpo, you've come to the right place, and I'll tell you why. Because real attacks happen by guys that do this for a living. Guys that will attack you. It's not an accident. It's planned out. They've come prepared to take something from you, whether if it's a woman, to take your virtue. If it's a man, is to take whoever you're with, or take your money or your valuables, and that always can lead to taking your life. So it's serious. It's serious stuff now. I said so. Professional bad guys are gonna always try to surprise you. Always try to surprise you. They'll usually have a friend, and they will almost always have a weapon. Those three things. So you have to understand, you have to be training against an assailant that maybe sometime in your life, you'll be accosted by somebody who surprises you. They have a friend and they have a weapon. If you're not training with those three things in mind, there's other reasons to train, but if it's for self-defense, I don't know why you're doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for street self-defense. I don't know why you're doing anything. I don't know why you're doing anything else. This has all the answers, especially if you add in the grappling, which I did. So I covered all the bases. I said, now make it even worse. Because you have some men who say, I've had a lot of experiences. I says, oh, yeah, that's good. So now picture this, Mr. Lots of Experiences. How about you're somewhere, you're alone, you're accosted by more than one assailant, they got weapons, and you have your daughter. Now what are you going to do? You going to wrestle him? I don't think so. You going to box him? Nope. Oh, you're going to kickbox him? Nope. Because none of those things are going to be work fast enough, and they're not going to be deadly enough to save this daughter, because they're there to take something from you. It's probably her and your valuables. It's probably leave you maimed or dead. And that's what you're training against. Now, if you train for that high threat level, in reality, it ends up being way down here, just some idiot and giving some road rage, yelling something out of his car window to meet you in the parking lot. That you can deal with. Up here, you better be training in Kenpo to do that. And you better be training with the right mindset, the ultimate mindset of Kenpo. So this is sport karate. It's not judo. It's not jiu-jitsu. All those things are geared towards sport. There's a world champ jiu-jitsu guy. He knows that's sport. It's not. He says, my son Johnny is my number 2 son. My number 3 son, of course, is also a fantastic grappler. And my oldest son is also a great fighter. My oldest son his expertise is striking. My 3rd son, his expertise, is everything. Middle son, though, is sport karate. He's a very good fighter, but he's really good at competition karate and competition grappling. My oldest son, I said, is really good at striking, sport or street. He's the one that's been a cop for 5 years. Lots of experience there. My third son, he's the guy you want to figure you're going to meet on the street because he's a very skilled martial artist. He can do sport karate, but he's the guy that has that street smart, street fighting ability that you're just born with. You have it or you don't. He's the guy you got to train for because there's guys out there who's very good at actual fighting. It's not sport. Train for those guys and make sure if they have a weapon, if they brought 2 of them and you've got your 8-year-old daughter. It's funny. I had a friend, a student rather, years ago. He was with us, and a friend of his talked him in to go train at Krav Maga for a little bit. And he went and trained at Krav Maga, then came back to us and told me his opinion of Krav Maga that he went to. He says, they're trying so hard to be like Kenpo, but it's just, it's really not. I know. I know the guy who founded Krav Maga. He just died 3 years ago. Anyway, I know his whole family. So I know all about Krav Maga, old and modern version. He said, then he went, because they said, do you mind us training in other studios, other places? For all the time I've been around, I said, go train. Do train simultaneous or don't train here at all. Go over there. You'll probably be back. Even if it's a good style, you'll probably be back because this fills in all the gaps. Kenpo fills in all the gaps. So he went and trained a little bit of jiu-jitsu. He came back. And he's talking to me and he said, and it's been about 8 months. He said, Mr. Hawkins, I have a story for you. And I wasn't done teaching. I said, I got another hour. He goes, oh, wait, it's a good story. I said, okay. I wait. He sits me down. 2 of my other black belts are finishing class. He tells me the story. And it's funny because it's exactly the kind of thing that I warn about. Because jiu-jitsu at that time, Brazilian jiu-jitsu at that time, I don't know what year this was. It was maybe 10 years into the UFC. UFC had been around a long time. So a lot of guys knew who the Gracies were, right? My student who went to train for the last 8 months at Gracie's. Prior to that, did Krav Maga. Prior to that, did Kenpo. Now he's back at Kenpo, but nevertheless, he says they finished a training session and they went out to lunch. He's telling me the story. His friend, my student's friend, and my student's friend, daughter. So it's 3 of them. 2 men and a daughter. And there's another table across the way. And his father starts having looks, glares with this guy across the way. And sure enough, my student says, what are you doing? What are you doing? He says, that guy's giving me some looks. He says, who cares? He says, and it's working on it. Finally, he says, that's it. He stands up and goes over there. What do you? So I'm going to teach him a lesson because he's been doing Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. He's going to go teach him a lesson. And my guy says, no. And he gets up, he goes, honey, you wait here. He goes halfway over and his friend and this other guy get into it. Apparently that guy's been doing some jiu-jitsu and his other buddy was just a fighter. So the other buddy came around, clocked him, hit him, just cold cocked him. And then the other one went in and grabbed him and they started wrestling around. He's already been hit once by the friend. So it's 2 of them on one. And he goes to help him. He does something to one guy. He goes, oh, where's his daughter? He turns around. No reason why. That third guy at that table was now standing behind the daughter at the other table, standing behind her. So he's looking at his friend, getting beat up, but probably deserved it. And then this guy said, he goes back there and uses a few choice words and says, get the hell out of here. And that guy did. And he moved. He got the girl and standing there. And the cops were like, he already hears the sirens. So they called cops like immediately. And they came. But his friend got his butt kicked because he thought he was a all-powerful Gracie Jiu-Jitsu purple belt or something. These guys, one was a wrestler, one was a fighter. They beat the crap out of him because he was exchanging glares. So, it was the wrong mindset. And it's not what we're supposed to do. And he said, Mr. Hawkins, everything you said came true. That guy got caught up in his head about how bad he was, forgot about he had a daughter to protect and now was not able to. And if I hadn't been there, I don't know what was going to happen. What was the plan? What was the plan of these guys? That's crazy. So I said, no, you're right. But that was
that was an important story, I think, for that guy to hear and understand. So, yeah, crazy.
I'm your host, Peter Taz, and you've tuned in to the Mind Sensei Podcast from Down Under. We want to take a moment to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the Mind Sensei Podcast. We appreciate your support and hope our show has been both informative and entertaining for you. If you haven't already done so, we would like to invite you to subscribe to our podcast so you never miss an episode. Finally, we'd like to thank our guests for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. Without their generosity, this podcast would not be possible. Thank you again for listening to the Mind Sensei Podcast Down Under. We hope that you continue to join us on this journey through the world of martial arts.